Bennett Caldwell stared at the signed divorce decree, a smirk playing on his lips as he swirled a glass of 50-year-old scotch. He believed he had pulled off the heist of the century, keeping the multi-million-dollar estate, the luxury cars, and his high-powered career, while leaving his ex-wife Hadley with nothing but a used sedan and her freedom. He toasted to his own genius, laughing at the thought of Hadley crawling back to her father's run-down mechanic shop. But Bennett didn't know that the ink on those papers had just triggered a dormant clause in a contract he never knew existed. He hadn't won a victory. He had just signed his own death warrant. The air in the penthouse suite of the Grand View Hotel smelled of expensive perfume and unbridled arrogance. Bennett Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city. At 38, Bennett was the picture of modern success: tailored Italian suit, perfectly coiffed hair, and a jawline that seemed carved from granite. But tonight, his most attractive feature, at least to the sycophants surrounding him, was his newfound bachelorhood. "To Bennett!" shouted Preston, his corporate attorney and longtime friend, the man who went into the lion's den of matrimonial law and walked out wearing a fur coat. The room erupted in laughter. Clinking crystal glasses chimed like bells of victory. Bennett turned, flashing his signature blinding smile. He raised a hand to quiet the room. "Please, please," Bennett said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Let's not call it a lion's den. That implies Hadley had teeth. It was more like stepping on a very slow, very sad snail. Lydia, a striking woman in a red velvet dress who had been Bennett's assistant for the past 2 years, draped herself over his arm. "You're terrible," she giggled, though her eyes gleamed with the predatory satisfaction of a woman who had finally secured her prize. "She didn't put up a fight at all?" "Not a peep," Bennett said, taking a sip of his drink. "She sat there in mediation, wearing that awful beige cardigan, and just nodded. Yes, Bennett. Okay, Bennett." It was pathetic. I almost felt bad for taking the house in the Hamptons. Almost. He didn't feel bad. In fact, he felt invincible. The prenup had been ironclad, or so he thought. But Bennett had gone a step further. He had hidden assets in offshore shells, undervalued his stock options in his company, Apex Dynamics, and convinced Hadley that the company was on the verge of bankruptcy to lower the settlement payout. He had gaslit her for months, making her believe she was lucky to walk away without debt. "What about her father?" Preston asked, loosening his tie. "Didn't you say he was some kind of blue-collar tough guy? I expected him to storm the courtroom." Bennett snorted, nearly choking on his drink. "Arthur? Please. The man spends his life under the hood of 1990s pickup trucks. His hands are permanently stained with grease. The only thing Arthur Sullivan knows how to run is an oil change. He was probably too busy scrubbing his fingernails to read the legal briefs." Bennett walked over to the marble bar, pouring another round. "Hadley is going back to that tiny, rotting bungalow her father calls a home. Meanwhile, Lydia and I are renovating the master suite. I'm thinking marble floors, heated, obviously." "Obviously," Lydia purred, kissing his cheek. "The best part," Bennett announced, addressing the room again, "is that tomorrow the board at Apex Dynamics is voting on the new CEO. With the divorce finalized, my assets are unencumbered. I am a shoo-in. I get the girl, I get the house, and tomorrow I get the empire." He checked his watch. It was a Patek Philippe, a gift to himself for surviving his marriage. "Speaking of the house," Bennett said, his eyes narrowing slightly with malice, "Hadley has until noon tomorrow to vacate the premises. I think I might stop by. You know, to ensure she doesn't steal the silverware." "That's cruel," Preston laughed. "I love it." Bennett felt a vibration in his pocket. It was a text from Hadley. Just 3 words. "I am packing." He typed back immediately. "Make sure you take your trash. I don't want the cleaners to have to deal with your clutter." He shoved the phone back into his pocket, feeling the rush of total dominance. He had won. He had erased the quiet, supportive woman who had put him through business school, the woman who had nursed him when he had pneumonia, the woman who had tolerated his late nights and business trips. She was gone, deleted like a bad line of code. What Bennett failed to notice, in his haze of narcissism, was that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes, silence is the sound of a predator holding its breath before the strike. The following morning, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with impending rain. Bennett pulled his silver Porsche into the driveway of the sprawling estate he now solely owned. The gravel crunched satisfyingly under the tires. He killed the engine and stepped out, adjusting his sunglasses. He wasn't alone. He had brought Lydia with him. She wanted to measure the drapes, but Bennett knew she really just wanted to mark her territory while the body was still warm. The front door was open. Inside, the house echoed. It was largely empty of personal touches, stripped back to the expensive, cold furniture Bennett preferred. He found Hadley in the library, placing a stack of old books into a cardboard box. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore jeans and a simple t-shirt. She didn't look like the ex-wife of a soon-to-be CEO. She looked invisible. "You're still here," Bennett boomed, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "I said noon. It is currently 11:45. Hadley didn't flinch. She carefully placed a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo into the box before turning to face him. Her eyes were dry. There was no sadness in them, which annoyed Bennett. He wanted tears. He wanted begging. "I'm almost done, Bennett," she said softly, "just waiting for my ride." Lydia sauntered in, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood. She ran a manicured finger along the mahogany desk. "This room is so dusty. We'll have to gut it. Maybe turn it into a yoga studio." Hadley looked at Lydia, then back to Bennett. "You moved on quickly." "I moved on years ago, Hadley," Bennett sneered. "I just waited for the paperwork to catch up. Now where is your father? Did his truck break down on the way here? I hope he doesn't drip oil on my driveway." As if on cue, the rumble of an engine grew loud outside. It wasn't the smooth purr of a luxury car. It was the guttural, coughing roar of an old diesel engine. Bennett walked to the window and laughed. Unbelievable. Look at that monstrosity. Pulling up the long, manicured driveway was a rusted, dented Ford F-150 that looked like it had survived a war zone. The bumper was held on with wire, and the paint was peeling in sheets. It parked right next to Bennett's pristine Porsche, looking like a dumpster next to a diamond. The driver's door creaked open, and Arthur Sullivan stepped out. He was a man built like a barrel, with broad shoulders stooped by decades of manual labor. He wore faded blue coveralls with the name Sully's Auto Repair stitched on the pocket. His hands were thick and calloused, permanently stained with grease and grime. He walked with a slight limp, heading toward the front door. Bennett met him at the entrance, blocking the way. "Arthur," Bennett said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'd ask you to take your shoes off, but I imagine the socks underneath are just as dirty." Arthur looked up. He had steel-grey eyes that sat deep in a weathered face. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "Bennett," Arthur said, his voice like gravel grinding together. "Here to help Hadley with the last few boxes." "Make it quick," Bennett snapped, "and try not to touch the walls. I just had them painted." Arthur stepped past him, ignoring the insult, as if Bennett were nothing more than a buzzing fly. He walked into the library and nodded to his daughter. "Ready, Elle?" Yes, Dad, Hadley said, taping the box shut. Bennett followed them in, needing to get the last word. You know, Arthur, you should really thank me. I'm letting her keep the jewelry I bought her. That should be enough to keep your little garage open for another year. Maybe you can finally afford a truck that was built in this century. Arthur picked up 2 heavy boxes, as if they weighed nothing. He paused, turning slowly to look at Bennett. You think money is what makes a man, Bennett? Arthur asked. It's what makes the world go round, Bennett scoffed. And right now, I have all of it. And you have back pain and a failing business. My business is doing fine, Arthur said evenly. Right. Fixing transmissions for soccer mums? Bennett laughed, looking at Lydia for validation. She smirked. Listen, old man, I'm going to be CEO of Apex Dynamics by this afternoon. I'm going to be on the cover of Forbes. You're going to be changing my oil. Arthur's expression shifted. For a split second, a look of amusement crossed his face. Apex Dynamics. Good company. Solid tech. Like you would know, Bennett sneered. Just get your junk and get out of my house. Your house? Arthur asked. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the crown molding. Interesting. Yes. My house. The deed is in my name. The court affirmed it yesterday. Arthur nodded. Come on, Hadley. Let's go. Hadley grabbed the last small box, a wooden case containing her flute. She had been a prodigy once, before Bennett told her that her music was annoying and distracted him from his work. They walked out to the truck. Bennett stood on the porch, watching them. He wanted to humiliate them one last time. Hey, Hadley, he shouted. If the roof leaks at your dad's shack, give me a call. I might have some spare tarp lying around the gardening shed. Hadley paused at the truck door. She looked back at the mansion, then at Bennett. For the first time in years, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone watching a man step off a cliff he doesn't know is there. Goodbye, Bennett, she said. Good luck at the board meeting. I don't need luck, he yelled back. I have talent. Arthur revved the loud, smoky engine of the truck. He backed out, the rusted bumper coming dangerously close to the Porsche, making Bennett flinch. As the truck rattled down the driveway and out of the gates, Bennett felt a surge of triumph. Finally, he exhaled, wrapping an arm around Lydia. The trash has taken itself out. Let's celebrate, Lydia whispered. Champagne? Better, Bennett said, checking his watch. I need to get to the office. The board meeting is at 2:00 p.m. I want to be there early to accept my crown. He didn't know that the trash he had just evicted was currently sitting in the passenger seat of that rusted truck, dialing a number on a secure, encrypted phone. Inside the truck, the noise of the engine made conversation difficult, but Arthur didn't need to shout. He reached into the glove compartment, pushing aside a greasy rag to reveal a sleek, black satellite phone. You okay, honey? Arthur asked, his voice softening. I'm fine, Dad, Hadley said, looking out the window as the mansion disappeared from view. He's worse than I remembered. He's a fool, Arthur grunted. A fool with a borrowed credit card. Arthur picked up the phone and dialed a number. He didn't look like a mechanic anymore. His posture straightened, his grip on the wheel firm and commanding. This is Sullivan, Arthur said into the phone. The voice on the other end answered immediately. Yes, Mr. Sullivan. We are ready for you. Good, Arthur said. Initiate Protocol 7. Freeze the accounts, and tell the board to hold the vote until I arrive. Sir, the voice on the other end hesitated. You're coming in person? You haven't been to the headquarters in 15 years. Arthur glanced at his daughter. It's time for a tune-up. I'm bringing the mechanic. He hung up and merged onto the highway. Bennett Caldwell was heading to the office to be crowned king. He had no idea that the Emperor was driving a 1998 Ford F-150 in the lane right next to him. The headquarters of Apex Dynamics was a monolith of steel and glass, piercing the downtown sky. It was a fortress of capitalism, and Bennett Caldwell walked through the revolving doors like he owned every rivet. He didn't just walk, he glided. He nodded dismissively to the security guard at the front desk, a man named Frank, whom he had ignored for 5 years. "Frank," he muttered, not breaking stride. "Mr. Caldwell," Frank said, his face impassive. "ID, please." Bennett stopped. He turned slowly, lowering his sunglasses. "Excuse me? I am the acting CEO. I have worked here for a decade. You know who I am." "New protocols, sir," Frank said, not looking up from his monitor. "Everyone scans, no exceptions." Bennett scoffed, digging into his briefcase for his badge. "Ridiculous. Remind me to have you replaced with a kiosk when the vote clears this afternoon." He slammed the badge against the reader. It beeped an angry red. "Access denied." Bennett stared at it. "It's malfunctioning. Open the gate, Frank." "System says you're flagged, sir. Pending status. It says pending because my title is changing from VP to CEO today, you incompetent moron," Bennett hissed. "Let me up, or you'll be applying for unemployment by 3 Autas PM. Frank hesitated, then pressed a button under the desk. The gate clicked open. "Go ahead, sir." "That's better." Bennett smoothed his lapel and marched toward the elevators. He didn't notice Frank picking up the phone and whispering, "The target is in the elevator. He's heading to the 50th floor." The elevator ride was swift and silent. Bennett checked his reflection in the polished metal doors. He looked perfect. He felt powerful. He replayed the morning's victory in his head, kicking Hadley and her dirty mechanic father off his property. It was the cherry on top of a perfect life. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, the atmosphere was different than usual. Usually, the executive floor hummed with the frantic energy of assistants running errands and phones ringing. Today, it was dead silent. The reception desk was empty. The hallways were clear. "Strange," Bennett muttered. He walked down the long corridor toward the main boardroom. The double doors were made of frosted glass, but he could see silhouettes inside. They were already there. Good. They were eager to crown him. Bennett pushed the doors open with both hands, making a grand entrance. "Gentlemen and ladies," he boomed, flashing his $1,000,000 smile. "Sorry for the delay. Had a bit of a pest control issue at the estate this morning." The boardroom was freezing. Around the massive, boat-shaped mahogany table sat the 12 members of the board of directors. These were the titans of industry, men and women who controlled billions. Usually they would be chatting, checking their phones or drinking coffee. Today they sat in stone-cold silence. Their hands were folded on the table. No one was smiling. At the head of the table, the seat reserved for the CEO, sat an empty chair. Bennett walked toward it, placing his briefcase on the table. "I assume we can skip the formalities," Bennett said, taking his jacket off and draping it over the back of the CEO's chair. "The quarterly numbers are up. The acquisition of Technova is complete, and my divorce is final. I am fully unencumbered and ready to lead Apex into the next fiscal year." He looked around the room, expecting applause or at least nods of approval. Mr. Pendergast, the chairman of the board, cleared his throat. He was a silver-haired man with eyes like a hawk. He didn't look at Bennett. He looked past him. "Sit down, Bennett," Pendergast said quietly. "Not in that chair. Take the guest seat." Bennett paused, his hand freezing on the leather of the CEO's chair. "Excuse me? The guest seat? That's for guests. I am the internal candidate. This is a formality." "Sit. Down," Pendergast repeated, his voice dropping an octave. Bennett felt a prickle of unease. He laughed nervously. "Okay, very serious mood today. I get it. The market is volatile." He pulled out the chair at the far end of the table, facing Pendergast. "So, let's get on with the vote." "There will be no vote on your appointment today," Pendergast said, opening a thick file in front of him. "Why not?" Bennett demanded, his temper flaring. "We agreed. Once the divorce was final, the morality clause was no longer an issue. I am single. My assets are secure." "We are waiting for the majority shareholder to arrive," Pendergast said. Bennett frowned. "Majority shareholder? Vanguard Trust holds 15%. You hold 10%. I hold 5%. There is no single majority shareholder. We are a publicly traded company with a diversified cap table." "That is what we all thought," Pendergast said, finally looking Bennett in the eye. "Until this morning. At 9 a.m., a dormant holding company activated a conversion clause in the original founding charter of Apex Dynamics. Apparently, when this company was founded 30 years ago, the original angel investor retained super voting rights, 100 votes per share, triggered only upon specific conditions." Bennett blinked. "What conditions?" "The departure of the original founder's bloodline from the beneficiary trust," Pendergast said, reading from the paper. "It's complicated legalese, Bennett, but essentially, someone just walked in and bought the throne out from under us. They own 51% of the voting power as of this morning." "Who?" Bennett stood up, his face reddening. "Who is it? Musk? Bezos? Some Chinese conglomerate?" "No," Pendergast said, glancing at the door. "They are here now." Bennett spun around. He expected a team of lawyers in sharp suits. He expected a tech mogul in a hoodie. The doors swung open. But it wasn't a billionaire in a suit. It was a man in blue, grease-stained coveralls. He was wiping his hands on a dirty red rag. He walked with a limp. Behind him walked a woman in jeans and a t-shirt, carrying a flute case. Bennett's brain short-circuited. He stared, his mouth hanging open. "Arthur? Hadley?" Arthur Sullivan didn't look at Bennett. He walked straight to the head of the table, the empty CEO chair. He looked at the expensive leather, grimaced, and then sat down, spreading grease on the armrests. "Sorry I'm late," Arthur rumbled, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Traffic was murder, and my truck overheated on Fifth Avenue." Bennett started to laugh. It was a hysterical, disbelief-filled laugh. Okay, this is a joke, a prank. Very funny, Pendergast." He pointed a trembling finger at Arthur. "You hired my ex-father-in-law to—" "What? Teach me humility? Get out of that chair, Arthur, before I call the police." Arthur ignored him. He looked at Pendergast. "Do we have coffee? Black. None of that foam garbage." "Right away, sir," Pendergast said, signaling to an aide. Bennett felt like the floor was tilting. "Sir? You're calling him sir? He changes tires for a living. He lives in a shack. He smells like diesel fuel." Arthur leaned back, putting his heavy work boots up on the polished mahogany table. A chunk of dried mud fell off his heel onto the varnish. "Bennett," Arthur said calmly, "you talk too much. You always have." "I demand an explanation," Bennett screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "Security! Frank, get up here!" "Frank works for me now," Arthur said. "Actually, everyone works for me now." Arthur reached into his coveralls pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of gum. He offered a piece to Pendergast, who politely declined. "Let me explain how the world works, Bennett," Arthur said, chewing slowly. "You see, you judge a man by his shoes. You judge a man by his car. You judge a man by the label on his suit." Arthur pointed a calloused finger at Bennett. "I judge a man by his hands. And your hands, Bennett. They've never done a hard day's work in their life. You move money around. You move people around. but you don't build anything. I built this company's stock price, Bennett yelled. You inflated it, Arthur corrected, by cutting quality control, by squeezing the pension fund, by outsourcing to the lowest bidder. Arthur looked at Hadley, who was standing quietly by the window. My daughter told me everything. You thought she was just a housewife. You didn't know she has a master's in forensic accounting, did you? Bennett froze. He looked at Hadley. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at him with a gaze that was sharp and cold. She plays the flute, Bennett stammered. I do, Hadley said, her voice clear. But I also balanced the books for Sullivan Global since I was 18. Sullivan Global? Bennett whispered. That doesn't exist. It's Sully's Auto Repair. Arthur laughed. It was a deep, belly laugh. Sully's Auto Repair is my shop. It's where I go to think. It's where I go to escape people like you. But Sullivan Global? That's the parent company. Arthur tapped the table. You see, Bennett, 30 years ago, I invented a little thing called the variable torque actuator. It's in every airplane, every high-speed train, and every luxury car in the world, including that Porsche you love so much. Bennett felt the blood drain from his face. The variable torque actuator was the foundational patent of modern engineering. Whoever owned that? I licensed the tech to Apex when it was a startup, Arthur continued, in exchange for a sleeping giant clause. I let the board run things. I stayed in the background because I hate suits. I hate meetings. I just wanted to fix cars and raise my daughter. Arthur's eyes hardened. The playful mechanic persona vanished, replaced by the shark-like gaze of a man who had conquered industries. But then, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a growl, you married my daughter, and you treated her like an accessory. I watched. I waited. I wanted to see if you would change, but you didn't. You got greedy. You got cruel. And then, Arthur smiled, you served her divorce papers, and in your arrogance, you tried to cheat her out of her fair share. I followed the prenup, Bennett squeaked. The prenup covered your assets, Hadley said, stepping forward. But it also had a clause about material change in circumstance. When you finalized the divorce yesterday, you triggered the separation of assets. But since you claimed Apex was your primary asset and undervalued it to hide money from me, you inadvertently triggered the bad faith clause in my father's original contract with Apex. Which means, Arthur finished, that because the CEO of Apex, that's you, acting CEO, attempted to defraud a Sullivan, that's her, the voting rights of the Sullivan shares reverted from passive to active, and they multiplied by 100. Arthur spread his hands. So as of this morning, I own 51% of this company, and my first order of business. Arthur looked at Pendergast. Motion to terminate Bennett Caldwell, effective immediately. Seconded, Pendergast said instantly. All in favor? Arthur asked. Every hand in the room went up, even the people Bennett thought were his friends. Preston, his lawyer, was sitting in the corner. He slowly raised his hand. Preston? Bennett gasped. You too? Business is business, Bennett. Preston shrugged. And Mr. Sullivan just retained my firm for double your hourly rate. Bennett stood there, stripped of his power, his title, and his dignity. But the nightmare wasn't over. You can't do this, Bennett screamed, his composure shattering completely. I have a contract. I have a golden parachute. If you fire me without cause, you owe me $20 million. Arthur leaned forward, resting his chin on his grease-stained hand. Oh, we have cause, Bennett. We have so much cause. Arthur slid a thick folder across the long table. It slid perfectly, stopping right at the edge where Bennett stood. Open it, Arthur commanded. Bennett opened the folder. His hands shook. Inside were photos, bank statements, emails. "What is this?" Bennett asked, his voice trembling. "That," Hadley said, "is proof of the offshore accounts you set up in the Cayman Islands, the ones you didn't declare in the divorce proceedings." "That is perjury," Arthur said, "and fraud. But that's a matter for the criminal courts. We are talking about corporate policy." Arthur pointed to a specific document. "You used Apex Company funds to renovate the penthouse you just kicked my daughter out of. You listed it as corporate housing maintenance. That is embezzlement, Bennett. That is cause." It was a perk," Bennett stammered. "Everyone does it." "I don't," Arthur said, "and I own the place." Arthur stood up. He was imposing, even in dirty coveralls. "So there is no golden parachute. There is no severance package. There is only you, walking out of here with nothing." "You can't prove that intent," Bennett yelled. "I'll sue. I'll drag this company through the mud for years." "Go ahead," Arthur said calmly. "I have more money than God, Bennett. I can keep you in court until the sun burns out. But you're leveraged to the hilt. I know about your debts. I know about the margin calls on your personal trading account." Bennett backed away. He looked around the room, searching for a sympathetic face. There were none. The board members looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Lydia," Bennett whispered. He pulled out his phone. "Lydia will help me. We still have the house." Hadley spoke up, her voice soft but cutting. "Check your phone, Bennett." Bennett looked down. He had 3 missed notifications from his bank. Alert, account frozen. Alert, credit card declined. Alert, mortgage default warning. "What did you do?" Bennett looked at Hadley with wild eyes. "The house," Hadley said. "The one you kicked me out of this morning. The deed was in your name, yes. But the land the house sits on was part of a 9-to-9-year lease held by Sullivan Global." Bennett's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "You bought the house," Arthur explained, "but you didn't check the ground lease. Classic rookie mistake. You were so busy looking at the marble floors, you didn't check the dirt underneath. The lease has a clause. The landowner may revoke the lease if the tenant engages in moral turpitude or criminal activity." Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin. "Embezzlement is criminal activity, Bennett. I revoked the lease 10 minutes ago. You are trespassing on my land. Security is currently removing your friend and your furniture." Bennett felt like he couldn't breathe. Everything, the career, the money, the house, the girl, was evaporating. "This is insane," Bennett whispered. "You planned this. You trapped me." "I didn't trap you," Arthur said, walking around the table to stand face to face with Bennett. The smell of oil and old tobacco was overpowering, clashing with Bennett's expensive cologne. "You built the trap yourself, brick by brick, lie by lie. I just sprung it." Arthur reached out and plucked the ID badge from Bennett's chest. "You're done here. Get out." Bennett looked at the badge in Arthur's hand. He looked at the board members who were now ignoring him, opening their binders to start the real meeting. He turned to Hadley. "Hadley, please. We were married for 5 years. Doesn't that mean anything?" Hadley looked at him. For a moment, she looked sad. "It meant everything to me, Bennett. That's why it hurts. But you killed it. You didn't just want a divorce. You wanted to destroy me. You wanted to win." She gestured to the room, to her father, to the power they held. "Well, Bennett, you wanted a war. You just didn't realize you were fighting a nuclear superpower with a stick." "Frank," Arthur bellowed. The doors opened, and 2 large security guards entered. They weren't the usual lobby guards. These were private security, wearing tactical vests. "Escort Mr. Caldwell to the exit," Arthur ordered. "Do not let him stop at his office. Do not let him take a stapler. If he resists, throw him out." The guards grabbed Bennett by the arms. "Get your hands off me!" Bennett shrieked, thrashing. "I am the CEO. I am Bennett Caldwell." As they dragged him out of the room, Arthur sat back down in the CAO chair. He propped his dirty boots back up on the table. "Okay," Arthur said to the stunned board members. "Now that the trash is taken out, let's talk about the pension fund. I hear we're underpaying the mechanics. That changes today." Bennett was thrown out of the building. Literally. The guards marched him through the lobby, past the staring eyes of the receptionists, the interns and the delivery drivers. They pushed him through the revolving doors and released him onto the concrete sidewalk. He stumbled, nearly falling into a puddle. His briefcase was tossed after him, sliding across the pavement. "And stay out!" one of the guards shouted. Bennett stood up, straightening his suit. He was hyperventilating. People were watching. Passers-by were recording him on their phones. "This isn't real," he told himself. "I can fix this." He grabbed his phone. He needed to call Lydia. She was resourceful. They could go to a hotel, regroup, hire a new lawyer. He dialed her number. It rang once, then went to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. Then a text message popped up. From Lydia. Message. "The security team just kicked me out of the house. They said you're under investigation for embezzlement. I can't be associated with this, Bennett. My reputation is everything. Don't contact me." Bennett stared at the screen. "Reputation?" he screamed at the phone. "You were an assistant." He was alone, standing on the sidewalk in a $3,000 suit, with no job, no home, no wife, no girlfriend, and no money. But Bennett Caldwell was not a man who gave up easily. He was a narcissist, and narcissists never believe they are truly beaten. The car, he thought. "I still have the Porsche. It's in the company garage, but it's registered to me personally. They can't take that." He ran around the block to the parking garage entrance. He needed to get to his car. He could drive to his parents' house upstate. He could sell the car for cash. It was worth $150,000. That was enough to start over. He rushed down the ramp. He saw his silver Porsche 911 parked in its reserved spot. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Yes," he hissed. "My baby." He ran toward it, keys in hand. But as he got closer, he saw someone standing next to it. It was a tow truck driver. And not just any tow truck driver. It was a man wearing a jumpsuit that said, "Sully's Auto Repair." The man was hooking the Porsche up to the winch of a massive tow truck. "Hey!" Bennett screamed, sprinting toward them. "Get away from my car! That is private property!" The driver looked up. He was a young guy, chewing on a toothpick. "You Bennett Caldwell?" "Yes. Unhook my car right now." "Can't do that, buddy," the driver said, patting the hood of the Porsche. "Repo order." "Repo? I own this outright." "According to the paperwork I got," the driver said, checking a clipboard. "This vehicle was purchased using a company loan from Apex Dynamics, a loan that had a call-on termination clause. Since you were terminated for cause about 20 minutes ago, the company is calling the loan." "Who authorized this?" Bennett shrieked. The driver pointed a thumb up toward the ceiling. "The big boss, Mr. Sullivan. He sent the order down personally. Said something about, 'It's hard to drive a Porsche when you're a snail.'" Bennett watched in horror as the winch tightened. The Porsche was dragged up onto the flatbed. "Wait!" Bennett grabbed the driver's arm. "Please, my wallet is in the glove box. Just let me get my wallet." The driver shook his head. "Sorry, pal. Everything in the car is considered collateral until the audit is finished. You can pick it up at the impound lot in about 6 months." The driver hopped into the truck and drove off, the Porsche swaying on the back. Bennett stood in the empty parking spot, breathing in the exhaust fumes. He had nothing. Well, almost nothing. He looked down at his hand. He still had his phone. He needed help. He needed a friend. He scrolled through his contacts. He had hundreds of friends, CEOs, VPs, socialites. He called Preston, blocked. He called his golf buddy, Carter. "Hello?" Carter answered. "Carter? Thank God. Look, I'm in a bit of a jam." "Bennett?" I heard. "It's all over the news sites. Apex CIO ousted for massive fraud. Look, man, don't call me. The feds are going to be involved. I can't be linked to you." Click. Bennett sat down on the concrete curb of the parking garage. He put his head in his hands. Just yesterday, he was bragging about a champagne toast. He was bragging about winning the divorce. He had called Hadley's father a loser. Now that loser was sitting in his office, drinking his coffee and owning his life. Bennett felt a vibration in his pocket. A text message. He looked at it. It was from an unknown number. Text. "If the roof leaks at your new place, give me a call. I might have some spare tarp. Arthur." Bennett threw the phone across the garage. It shattered against the wall. He sat in the silence, the echo of his own destruction ringing in his ears. But the story wasn't over, because men like Bennett don't just fade away. They lash out. And Bennett had one last, desperate card to play. He knew something about Apex that Arthur didn't, or at least he thought he did. 3 days later, Bennett Caldwell sat on the edge of a stained mattress in the Motel 6 by the airport. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and despair. He wore the same Italian suit he had been thrown out in, now wrinkled and spotted with cheap coffee stains. He had $50 left in his pocket, cash he had found in his jacket pocket, forgotten change from a valet tip. He stared at the laptop open on his lap. It was a cheap model he'd bought at a pawn shop, trading his cufflinks for it. On the screen was a loading bar. Uploading. Project Zeus. Backup.r. 98% complete. Bennett grinned, his eyes bloodshot and manic. "You think you won, Arthur?" he whispered to the empty room. "You think you can just throw me away like a used oil filter? I am Bennett Caldwell. I always have an ace up my sleeve." Before leaving his office for the boardroom that fateful morning, Bennett had done something strictly forbidden by company protocol. He had copied the source code for the variable torque actuator, Arthur's precious invention, onto a secure, hidden cloud server. He had intended to use it as leverage for a bonus negotiation, but now it was his weapon of mass destruction. He wasn't going to get his job back. He knew that. But he could burn Apex Dynamics to the ground. He opened an encrypted email client. He had already established contact with Vector Industries, Apex's fiercest competitor. Vector was run by a man named Victor Kinsley, a ruthless corporate raider who had been trying to reverse engineer Arthur's tech for a decade. Bennett typed furiously. Subject: "The keys to the kingdom. To V. Kinsley, vectorinsecure.net. I have the code, the full schematic, the patent overrides. I can give you the ability to build the actuator for half the cost. It will bankrupt Apex within 6 months. Price is $10 million. Deposited into a Swiss Bitcoin wallet. Meet me at the private airfield, Hangar 4, at midnight. Come alone." He hit send. Almost immediately, a reply pinged back. "Done. Don't be late." Bennett slammed the laptop shut. He laughed, a high-pitched, jagged sound. $10 million. It wasn't the empire he had before, but it was enough to disappear. He would go to Brazil. He would live like a king on a beach, and he would watch the stock ticker as Apex Dynamics crashed and burned. He would watch Hadley and her father lose everything. "Karma," Bennett muttered, standing up and smoothing his ruined suit. "It works both ways." He left the motel, walking toward the highway to hitchhike to the airfield. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He was no longer a victim. He was a spy, a rogue agent. He convinced himself this was a movie, and he was the anti-hero who would win in the final act. He didn't realize that in the world of high-stakes corporate warfare, amateur spies usually end up as casualties. The airfield was dark and cold. The wind howled across the tarmac. Bennett shivered, clutching the USB drive he had transferred the data onto. He saw a black SUV parked near Hangar 4, its headlights off. He approached cautiously. "Victor!" he called out. The rear door of the SUV opened. A tall man in a trench coat stepped out. It was Victor Kinsley. He looked sharp, predatory, and impatient. "You look terrible, Bennett," Victor said, his voice smooth like oil. "Rough week?" "Cut the small talk," Bennett snapped, holding up the drive. "Do you have the money?" "The transfer is queued," Victor said, holding up a tablet. "I just need to verify the data." Bennett walked forward, his hand trembling. "It's all there. The kernel architecture, the thermal regulation protocols. It's Arthur Sullivan's life's work. With this, you can crush him." "Crush him," Victor repeated, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Yes. That would be the logical move." Victor took the drive. He plugged it into the tablet. He watched the screen for a moment, analyzing the code. "Brilliant," Victor murmured. "It really is the original source code." "Transfer the money," Bennett demanded. "I have a plane to catch." Victor looked up. The smile vanished. "You know, Bennett, there's a problem with stealing from a man like Arthur Sullivan." "What problem? He's a mechanic." "He's not just a mechanic," Victor said. "He's a legend. Did you know Arthur fixed my first car when I was 16? He didn't charge me a dime because he knew my mum was struggling." Bennett froze. The wind seemed to stop. "What?" "Arthur and I act like rivals to keep the antitrust regulators happy," Victor said, tossing the USB drive onto the concrete. "But in this industry, there is a code. You don't steal a man's invention, and you certainly don't betray family." Bennett backed away. No, this is business. You want this tech." "I do," Victor said, "but I'd rather license it legally than buy stolen goods from a desperate rat." Victor snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the hangar, blinding floodlights turned on, illuminating the tarmac. Bennett shielded his eyes. As his vision adjusted, he saw them. Leaning against a police cruiser was Arthur Sullivan. He was wearing his coveralls, arms crossed. Next to him was Hadley, looking fierce, and flanked around them were federal agents in FBI windbreakers. "Hello, Bennett," Arthur called out. His voice carried effortlessly across the distance. Bennett spun around to run, but two agents grabbed him before he could take a step. They slammed him against the hood of the SUV, handcuffing him roughly. "You set me up!" Bennett screamed, spitting on the ground. "Entrapment! This is entrapment!" Arthur walked over slowly. The limp was still there, but his presence was terrifying. He stopped 2 feet from Bennett. "It's not entrapment if you offer the stolen goods first, son," Arthur said softly. "We've been monitoring your cloud activity since you left the building. You really thought you could access the secure server without triggering an alert? I wrote that security protocol myself in 1999. "I hate you," Bennett yelled, tears of rage streaming down his face. "I made that company. I deserve a cut." "You deserve a cell," Hadley said, stepping up beside her father. She held a folder. "Corporate espionage, grand larceny, violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And thanks to this little meeting, attempted sale of trade secrets across state lines. That's a federal crime, Bennett." Bennett looked at Hadley. "Hadley, baby, please. I did it for us. I was going to call you. I was going to share the money." Hadley laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "You were going to run to Brazil, We saw the flight search history on your laptop." She leaned in close. "You bragged about winning the divorce, Bennett. You wanted me to have nothing. You wanted me to be invisible. Well, now you're going to prison. And do you know what happens to men like you in prison? You become invisible." The FBI agents pulled Bennett upright. "Take him away," Arthur said, waving his hand as if swatting a fly. "Wait!" Bennett cried as they dragged him toward the cruiser. "Arthur, I can fix this. I know where the tax shelters are. I can help you." "I pay my taxes, Bennett," Arthur shouted back. "That's the difference between us." Bennett was shoved into the back of the police car. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing him in a cage of wire mesh and hard plastic. As the car drove away, he looked out the window. He saw Arthur shake Victor's hand. He saw Hadley hug her father. They looked happy. They looked clean. And Bennett Caldwell, the man who had everything, finally understood the true cost of arrogance. He had tried to break a simple mechanic, only to find out that the mechanic was the one holding the wrench that turned the world. 6 months later, the sound of a Mozart flute concerto drifted through the air of the newly renovated community center in the heart of the city. The room was packed. Children from underprivileged neighborhoods sat cross-legged on the floor, mesmerized by the music. On stage, Hadley Sullivan played with her eyes closed. She wore a stunning sapphire blue gown. She wasn't playing for a billionaire husband who ignored her. She was playing for herself and for the people who mattered. When she finished, the applause was deafening. She bowed, smiling radiantly. As she walked off stage, she was handed a bouquet of white lilies by a man in a sharp suit. But this man had grease under his fingernails. "Good show, Elle," Arthur said, beaming with pride. He had traded his coveralls for a suit today, though he still refused to wear a tie. "Thanks, Dad," Hadley said, smelling the flowers. "How's the board meeting going?" "Boring," Arthur grunted. "Pendergast keeps trying to use big words to impress me. I told him if he says synergy one more time, I'm making him change the oil in the delivery fleet." Hadley laughed. "And the company? Profits are up 40% since we stopped cooking the books and started actually paying the engineers," Arthur said. "Who knew treating people well was good for business?" They walked out of the center toward the parking lot. Parked there was Arthur's old, rusted Ford F-150. But next to it was a brand-new, custom-built convertible, a gift from Arthur to Hadley. "You hear about Bennett?" Arthur asked quietly as they reached the trucks. Hadley's smile faded slightly, but her eyes remained peaceful. "I heard. The plea deal fell through." 10 years, Arthur nodded. "Minimum security, but still. He's working in the prison laundry, ironing sheets." "He always did like a crisp suit," Hadley mused. "Now he can make them for everyone else." "He wrote me a letter," Arthur revealed, pulling a crumpled envelope from his pocket. "Asking for money for the commissary. Said the coffee in there is undrinkable." "What did you do?" Arthur grinned, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "I sent him a bag of premium beans and a manual coffee grinder. Told him if he wants good coffee, he has to work for it. Grind it by hand." Hadley shook her head, laughing. "You're impossible." "I'm just a mechanic," Arthur said, opening the door of his rusty truck. "I fix things. And I think we're finally fixed." Hadley looked at the sky. It was a clear, bright blue. No storm clouds, no impending doom. Just freedom. "Yes, Dad," she said. "We are." She got into her car, the engine purring to life. Arthur revved his loud, smoky diesel engine. They drove out of the lot together, side by side. Bennett Caldwell sat in a grey room, folding a grey sheet. The steam from the iron hissed, a sound that reminded him of the champagne bottle opening on the night he thought he had won. He looked at his hands. They were blistered from the heat of the iron. He was no longer the CEO. He was inmate 739. And as he folded the corner of the sheet, trying to get it perfectly straight, he realized that for the first time in his life, he was doing honest work. It was a hard lesson. But as Arthur Sullivan would say, some parts can't be fixed. They have to be replaced. Bennett Caldwell had been replaced, and the world was better for it. The story of Bennett Caldwell is a stark reminder that arrogance is a fragile foundation for a life. He mistook kindness for weakness, and silence for submission. He believed that money and titles made him superior, failing to realize that true power lies in character, loyalty, and the skills you hold in your own two hands. Bennett thought he was playing a game of chess against a pawn, not realizing he was sitting across from the Grand Master. In the end, the mechanic he despised dismantled his life with the same precision he used to fix an engine. It serves as a warning to everyone. Be humble. Treat people with respect, regardless of their job title or the car they drive. Because the person you step on today might be the one holding the keys to your future tomorrow. Wow, what a journey. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and ultimate justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this.